The sun rose over the Spanish plains on July 22nd, 1812, cutting through the haze of gunpowder and heat that had hung for days. To the east of Salamanca, two great armies faced each other across the rolling hills, one led by Marshal Auguste de Marmont of France, the other by Arthur Wellesley, the British commander who would one day be known as the Duke of Wellington. Both men were masters of strategy, patient, cautious, waiting for the other to make a single misstep that would open the door to victory. The Peninsular War had raged 4 years, a brutal and unforgiving campaign that bled Napoleon's empire dry. But here, near Salamanca, everything was about to change. Marmont had every reason to feel confident. His army of nearly 50,000 was experienced, disciplined, and well-equipped. He believed he understood Wellington's mind, the cautious Englishman who always fought on the defensive, never risking a decisive engagement. But this time, Wellington had something else in mind. He had been waiting for weeks, studying Marmont's maneuvers, predicting his arrogance, and setting the perfect trap. The terrain around Salamanca was treacherous. Long ridges and valleys, open plains, broken by rocky outcrops. Known as the Arp, each ridge offered cover, each slope a hidden advantage. Wellington positioned his army behind these ridges, unseen, waiting for the right moment to strike. Marmont, misreading the silence, thought the British were retreating. That misjudgment would cost him everything. For days, the armies shadowed each other, maneuvering, testing, waiting for the storm to break. The men were exhausted, marching under a relentless sun, their uniforms soaked with sweat and dust. Food was scarce, tempers short. But still, both sides held the line. Then, on the afternoon of July 22nd, Marmont saw what he believed was his opportunity. Wellington's right flank appeared open. The British seemed to be falling back. He saw a chance to cut them off, crush them against the River Tormes, and end the British campaign in Spain once and for all. He ordered his divisions to sweep around Wellington's flank, a bold move, but one that stretched his line dangerously thin. One by one, the French divisions fanned out, each moving further west, unaware that Wellington's eyes were fixed on them from a distant ridge. Then, in that single instant, everything changed. Wellington saw it, the fatal gap forming between the French divisions. The moment he had been waiting for. He turned in the saddle, his face sharp with focus, and called out, "Now's the time." Drums thundered. Bugles screamed. The British army exploded into motion. General Pakenham's 3rd Division, hidden behind the ridge, surged forward in a storm of musket fire and bayonets. Their redcoats blazed in the sun as they crashed into the exposed French left. Marmont, realizing too late what was happening, tried to issue orders. But before he could, an exploding shell struck near him, shattering his arm and ribs. He was carried from the field, bleeding, unconscious. His second-in-command, General Bonnet, was wounded minutes later. Command of the French army fell into chaos. Meanwhile, Pakenham's men tore through the French flank like a scythe through wheat. Muskets flashed. Cannons roared. The air filled with the acrid smoke of gunpowder and the screams of men. The French divisions, caught off guard, reeled under the shock. Their once perfect lines disintegrated into confusion. WellingtonEver.com, amid the chaos, directed his troops with deadly precision. He rode along the front, his voice rising over the cannon fire. "Press on. Close the gap. Don't give them time to breathe." The British soldiers responded with a ferocity born of years of frustration and revenge. They had been fighting this war for too long. Now was their moment. As Pakenham's assault tore into the French left, Wellington unleashed his second blow. Cole's 4th Division and Leith's 5th Division stormed forward toward the French center. They advanced with brutal discipline, firing volley after volley before closing in with the bayonet. The French lines crumbled under the pressure. By late afternoon, the battlefield had become a storm of fire and death. French guns tried to halt the British advance, blasting canisters shot into the packed ranks. But nothing could stop the momentum. Smoke rolled across the plains. The heat, the noise, the chaos. It was hell on earth. Then came the cavalry. Wellington's horsemen British dragoons and the King-est German Legion thundered across the field, their sabers glinting. They smashed into the broken French formations, cutting down fleeing soldiers and capturing guns. The ground shook under the weight of their charge. The French left collapsed entirely, and what had begun as a brilliant maneuver turned into a desperate fight for survival. But the French were not finished yet. On the right, General Clausel rallied what was left of the army, forming a new line amid the wreckage. He launched a counterattack that slammed into the advancing British divisions with terrifying force. The clash was brutal. Smoke blinded the soldiers. The air stank of blood and powder. Clausel's men fought with the ferocity of desperation, and for a moment, the British advance stalled. The two armies locked in savage, close-quarter combat. Muskets became clubs. Bayonets flashed in the dust. Officers shouted orders no one could hear. Wellington rode dangerously close to the fighting, shouting encouragement, sending in reinforcements wherever the line began to waver. He knew this was the moment that would decide everything, victory or destruction. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, both armies teetered on the edge. The French counterattack raged, but their strength was fading fast. They had been fighting all day without clear command, their formations shattered, their morale collapsing. Wellington saw his chance to deliver the killing blow, and he was ready to take it. As the evening light spread over the ridges of Arapiles, Wellington gave the signal. General Clinton's 6th Division, fresh and eager, surged forward into the maelstrom. Their arrival broke the deadlock. The British line roared to life once more, and the French, exhausted and disoriented, began to give way. Clausel tried to hold his ground, but it was hopeless. The British infantry closed in from every side, their volleys ripping through what remained of the French formations. The French center collapsed first, then the right began to crumble. Clausel ordered a retreat, but by then it was too late. Panic had already spread. The entire French army began to disintegrate. Soldiers threw down their muskets, shouting for their lives. Horses bolted through the smoke. Officers screamed for order that no one could hear. Wellington's cavalry struck again, driving deep into the fleeing masses. The French retreat turned into a rout. 4 miles. The fields were littered with abandoned artillery, broken wagons, and the bodies of men trampled underfoot. The British pursued relentlessly, sabers flashing in the twilight. By nightfall, the battle was over. The thunder of guns faded into silence, replaced by the moans of the wounded and the crackle of burning wagons. The ground around Salamanca was soaked in blood. Over 14,000 French soldiers were dead, wounded, or captured. Wellington had lost far fewer, but even among the victors, the horror of the day clung to every man. As the darkness deepened, Wellington rode out across the battlefield. Fires flickered in the distance, lighting the broken landscape, the twisted bodies, shattered cannon, the tattered flags lying in the dirt. The air was thick with smoke and the scent of death. For a long time, he said nothing. Then, quietly, he turned to one of his officers and said, "By God, that will do." It was one of the greatest victories of his career, a masterstroke of timing, deception, and courage. Salamanca had not just been won. It had been seized with brilliance and precision. In a single afternoon, Wellington had destroyed a French army and shattered Napoleon's grip on western Spain. The news of the victory spread across Europe like wildfire. In London, church bells rang and crowds filled the streets in celebration. In Madrid, the Spanish resistance took new hope. The French occupiers could be beaten. And in Paris, Napoleon himself was furious. He had underestimated Wellington, dismissing him as a mere defensive general, cautious and predictable. But now, the British commander had proved that he could strike with speed and ferocity worthy of any French marshal. The aftermath of Salamanca changed everything. The French retreat from Madrid soon followed. Wellington entered the Spanish capital to the cheers of its people, hailed as a liberator. The myth of Napoleon's invincibility was cracking, and the tide of the Peninsular War had turned. Yet even in victory, Wellington understood the cost. He had seen too many men die, too many fields turned into graveyards. The victory at Salamanca was glorious, but it was also grim. It showed the world that empires could fall as swiftly as they rose, that arrogance could destroy even the greatest armies, In the years that followed, Wellington's triumphs would lead him all the way to Waterloo, where he would finally face Napoleon himself. But it was here, on the sun-scorched plains of Salamanca, that his legend was born. The Battle of Salamanca was not just a victory. It was a message, a signal to all of Europe that Napoleon's power was not eternal, that the tide of war could turn with one brilliant decision, one bold stroke, one man's courage to seize the moment. And as dawn rose the next morning, painting the battlefield in gold, the British soldiers who had survived stood among the ruins of Marmont's army, knowing they had witnessed history. The empire that once seemed unstoppable had been struck a mortal blow, and the man who delivered it rode silently among them, his expression calm as mind, already fixed on the next battle that would decide the fate of Europe.